All right, Joe, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. And I had a conversation earlier this week with a buddy. We were on the phone talking, and at the end of our conversation, he said, "I love you. Goodbye." And I said, "I love you. Goodbye." And my wife was in the other room, and she said, "Who were you just on the phone with?" And I told her the guy's name. She's like, "And you said I love you?" And I was like, "Yeah." She said, "This is what sets us up for what's going to kill us in this episode right here." She said, "That's adorable."
I know.
That's adorable. I'm like, that's not what I was going for. I wasn't going for adorable. But no, we've been talking to guys about some of the virtues of godly character and how do we begin as men to pursue these virtues. And the virtue I want to talk about today is love. But man, love does have with men kind of a tainted view in some senses. We think of love sometimes. Oh, that's just adorable, right? And so I think we're going to face a little bit of that hurdle as we tell guys, because I do want to be explicit. Guys, our aim for you is to love. But that do I don't know, do you face the same trouble in talking to guys about love? It's just kind of cute. It's kind of adorable.
I'm just trying to imagine, Evan, how I'd respond if you just turned and told me that you love me. And I think honestly, I would just kind of be stuttering. And if you've ever seen trains, planes, and automobiles, that moment where it's just like, how about those Bears? Like, trying to think of a football score, something to talk about to deflect the awkwardness.
Well, to
So
be clear, I did not initiate it. Okay, I returned it, but I wasn't going to leave the guy hanging. Okay, I
no,
returned
no, I
it.
think it's I think it exposes a deep problem, and it's a problem in me. That this is something, truth be told, I don't think that much about being loving, becoming someone who can receive love, express love better. This is not something that as men that our culture really trains us in. And so, there's this discord between the Bible, which is constantly pushing us to a place where love is the defining characteristic of who we are, and then how we think of our masculinity and identity and all these things that honestly close us in on ourselves, make us more callous, less expressive, and stifle that love. So yeah, I think it's something I need to talk about, and I certainly see the importance of it.
Yeah, we definitely it's a subject we can't avoid. A, because I mean it's hard to read the Bible without coming across love and obviously love being an obvious theme there, right? But there is a disconnect between okay, love is clear and our call to love is clear in the Bible, but in culture perhaps not as clear when you start talking about training men. Who trains men in love? That's not really a thing in our culture these days. And even when you start to talk to guys about what's admirable and things. You say, okay, courage, man, that's honorable. When a guy has courage, that's honorable. When a guy has self-control, that's commendable. Love, that's adorable, right? That's our problem, right? As men, we see courage, we see self-control. Those are commendable, honorable traits. But love, it's kind of adorable, and we should see that as a problem as Christian men. That should not be our stance, right? It should be that we see as admirable, as honorable love, the pursuit of love, and that the pursuit of this virtue of love should be honorable. So I want us to get guys there. I want us to
Mhm.
get guys talking about love and thinking about are we loving as men? Are we pursuing love? So let's get guys just started off by reminding them what the Bible has to say about love. So why don't you give us a few verses that'll help guys see this more clearly?
It's one of these things where the consistency of prioritizing love, it should be striking to us. We see it with Jesus, when he's asked that question, what is the greatest commandment? And, the greatest being to love the Lord our God with heart, mind, soul, and strength, but then also to love our neighbor as ourselves. So, he puts it front and center, and he does so not just with his words, but with his actions. Greater love has no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. And so it's just everywhere in what Jesus is doing, what he's saying, what he's teaching. But then if you keep reading in your Bible, as you move into Paul's letters, it's the same thing. In Romans 13, he's talking about, all the commandments being fulfilled by love. There's that chapter 13 of First Corinthians, which is just beautiful picture of love, so beautiful that even non-Christians want it read at their weddings because you just can't deny how wonderful that portrait of Christian love is. And you just keep going through your Bible, and it's something highlighted by Peter. But I'm just going to zoom into one passage, and this is from First John, and the whole of First John is talking about love and love again and again. But just how important it is. We see it. This is chapter 4, starting verse 7. It says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was shown among us, that God sent his only Son into the world that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another." I don't need to say much about that. I mean, it says
Yeah.
that you don't know God if you don't love.
Mm.
If you've been born of God, you do love. God is love. He's shown his love. He is the first, initiator by loving us even before we loved him. And so what you just see is this is the thing. Like, if we're talking, what is the sign of maturity? What is the perfection of Christian character? We don't have to think real hard. It's love. And that ought to push us to a place as men to think, okay, this is something I need to think about. This is something I need to prioritize in terms of my spiritual growth.
Yeah, the Bible makes it clear this is what sets us apart as Christian men. This is a podcast for Christian men who want to grow. And as a Christian man, what sets you apart from the world and from other men around you? And it should be love, right? Love is that thing that's going to kind of set us apart. And I think it does expose in me some of the fear of a lot of men's discipleship stuff, including some of the programs and stuff that we put out. I think it's easy to be a partaker to jump into a men's discipleship program or something. And, in the instance of like CT12, our core program that we want guys to join in, they're going to start to break bad habits. They're going to start to set up simple routines in their lives and get bodily discipline, spiritual friendships, all of this, which is great. But if guys do all of that and they don't grow in love, or they don't understand that the love of God above all else is the aim of their life, then we failed as men who want to disciple men. And so I think it's something that we can even miss, even as we, in Christian ministry, is pushing guys towards certain tasks and to-dos that are helpful in their lives. But bypass the fact that, no, our biggest aim is we want you to be men of love. We want you to be men who stand out above all else as guys that love God above everything, the guys that love your neighbor and love all those that are around you. And it's a tall order. It's a high ask. But we've missed the point otherwise, right?
Oh yeah, and I think speaking personally, I love it. Give me a task, give me a challenge.
Yep.
Don't give me a difficult relationship. Like that exposes the real depth of my depravity, because I don't want to have to love. I want to do stuff. I want to get stuff done, and that just shows something broken deeply still in my heart.
Yeah. All right, so let's give a little more clarity to guys as they start to think about love and how to go and pursue this virtue. Let's give some clarity to a definition of love, because obviously you can look around you and there's all kinds of different ways that you could define love. So what are we really pointing guys towards?
Yeah, love is one of these things where we use one word, but that word can actually be a reference to a lot of different things. So if you just say a car, there's multiple types of car out there. And if you're talking about love, there are a lot of types of love. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about the love that the New Testament's prioritizing. Well, it's not erotic love, sexual love. It's not also just a mere attachment. We often talk about, I love, my college, or I love my high school. There's this attachment that we really do value. But again, you got to push that aside. It's not that. It's not just the kind of affection you feel toward maybe a friend or even to a pet. When you were talking about adorable love, we use that language because we're thinking about the wrong type of love. There isn't an adorable kind of love, but again, that's not doing justice to the New Testament. As you keep moving up, you get to covenantal love. Now we're getting closer. So this is the kind of promised love where, for better or worse, sickness and health, that you stick with someone. And that is something that God reveals about himself. It's something we're called to grow in. And then if you're really thinking about the height of what the New Testament's describing, traditionally Christians have used a special term. And it's not used in modern language, so it sounds kind of funny to our ears, but it's the word charity. And charity traditionally is when you love God above all things, and you love, human beings, people, for the sake of God.
Hmm.
So it's that aspiration for God to be everything, to see him for his worth and love him. And then because you love him, to then love his creation, to love other people. And so that's what we're talking about. And that's not adorable. This is something, that you're talking about the height of virtue. There's no greater challenge. There's no greater calling than to begin to grow in this type of love.
Yeah, that's great. And now help guys, I guess, see one of the filters I like to put things through is, can you give me a vision of what that looks like in my life played out over a number of years? In other words, guys are always trying to see who is the man that I am becoming? Who's the man that I want to become, and how do I get there? So if guys pursue charity, this kind of love that you're talking about, give them a vision of what life looks like as they do that.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's so powerful about how Paul in particular talks about this love is, as you listen to his description, for example, in Colossians 3, what you find is that this is a love that it includes internal attitudes, it includes internal affections, but also external actions, and that each of these things would be incomplete without the other. So, just to give you some examples, like love, it's not a mere feeling. That it needs to show itself through what Paul would say kindness, meekness, bearing with people, forgiving, serving, sacrificing. All of these are actions, and love needs to give birth to action. However, if it just had the action without a corresponding internal attitude, that wouldn't be true love either. And so Paul will also talk about that within your heart, you need to feel compassion, you need to feel humility, you need to have a patient spirit, you need to submit to one another. All of these are internal things. And so what we're describing is a man who is developing on the inside. So, for example, when he sees someone with need, he feels compassion. But it would not be love to feel that compassion and then walk by the need. He has to actually do something in terms of showing kindness. Now, the opposite would be the case as well. If he does an act of kindness but doesn't feel the compassion, that wouldn't be love either. And we've all been treated, in that way by someone. And it feels like somebody is belittling your values. So this is a picture of growing internally in a set of internal attitudes, but equally expressing these through actions. And when these two things come together, we're getting close to Christian love.
Yeah, I love that picture of growing both internally and the external attitudes that come along with that. And just looking at the list of some of those internal attitudes, external actions that you mentioned there. Yeah, guys, if you are trying to become that ideal marriage candidate, right? Like if maybe you're single and you're like, man, how do I become that guy that every woman wants to marry? Or if you're out there and you're like, man, how do I become the ideal employee even? And let me just read those again, and this is going to give you some clarity of a vision of that life, how to be the ideal marriage candidate here. Compassion, humility, patience, responsibility, kindness, meekness, bearing with one another, forgiving, serving, sacrificing. That's it, right? Like that guy that has those external actions, those internal attitudes. Man, that's the guy everybody wants to be around. That's the guy that everybody respects, wants to work for, wants to work with, wants to be married to. So that's the vision of life that we want guys to have for sure. Let me take the opposing view here for a second as well and say, okay, give guys a vision of life without love. If they choose not to pursue this virtue of love, what is the vision of life that comes out of that?
Yeah. What's interesting is when you're talking about the deadly sins, that traditionally, I mean, the list includes anger, lust, envy, pride, greed, gluttony, sloth. What's interesting is each of these is an expression of a lack of love. So, for example, take lust. If you are reducing someone to their sexual value, there's no love and appreciation for the dignity of that person. Or take anger. In that moment of anger, you are seeing the world through your own point of view. You are tone deaf to their point of view. There's no compassion in your heart in that moment where you get on your high horse and just judge other people. Or, you think of greed, greed, when you prioritize a thing over people. And so whether, you're greedy for success or you're greedy for money, even something like gluttony, where you are so caught up with your moment by moment happiness. So you're just indulging food or you're indulging, just entertainment. What that does is that means that you become blind to, all of the need around you other than yourself. And so what you see is that the picture of not having love is the picture of somebody who is expressing the ugliest traits
Mm.
that we're able to express as human beings. And so, I mean, there's this, just like you described, this person, this model of love, which is Jesus, and just how attractive, I mean, his personality is. With the opposite, I mean, you're talking about Satan when you're talking about the heart that's devoid of love, and
Mm.
that is something that's horrific in its ugliness.
Yeah. What we get is, I guess, a lot of what you're saying here is a picture of love as an overarching kind of glue for all the
Mm.
other virtues that we want guys to pursue. Love kind of, you get that picture in Colossians 3, like love
Right.
is what holds all together. And so is that, how do guys begin to see a clear picture of that? That love is not just on its own, but it is something that holds everything together.
Yeah. I mean, Colossians 3 is the place I would point guys to. And above all these things, put on love, which binds all the rest, Paul says, together. And so there's this sense that what we often do with the virtues is we treat them like they're all discrete and separate.
Yeah.
So I want, patience, and that's self-contained.
Yeah.
And maybe I want kindness, and that's self-contained. But the thing is, it's only when each of these pieces come together that all of a sudden, it's like a Lego set, they form an object.
Yeah.
And it's the object that contains each of the parts. That's the actual shape of love. And so the person of love can't just be patient. It's to be patient and kind
Mm.
and compassionate and humble, each of these things. And then all of a sudden, what begins to take shape is there's a form that emerges, and it's nothing less than the form of God, because God is love, and he begins to be seen in us. Now, that's overwhelming. I mean, if I think of, okay, if I'm halfway through life, I mean, I'm not going to finish this, this side of glory. But man, if you're wanting something, that Jim Collins, that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal, I mean, here it is. Go pursue reflecting the character of God.
That's great. Yeah. So let's do it. All right, let's do it as men. How do we get there? Give me a step one. What do we do to point guys towards beginning to grow in love, this virtue of love?
Well, step one is to realize all the advice you're getting from the world right now is totally wrong. All of the self-care language, all of the pop psychology about, you need to look after you first and then you can love others. That's not the biblical perspective. We get turned the other way, that it's only in giving ourselves that we find our fulfillment, is our true design. So that's the first step, is just as you're listening to podcasts, as you're, consuming, different forms of media and culture, is just to listen and really detect that lie whenever you're being told that, no, you've got to put yourself first. That's the key to happiness.
Yeah, I think that guys get wrapped up in this in all sorts of different ways. But maybe one healthy way for guys to think about this is, if you are the best looking guy in the gym because you really value yourself, want to take care of yourself, and self-care and all of that, and you turn out to be the best looking guy in the gym, but you don't love anyone in the gym, you've missed the mark, right?
Yeah.
We've totally listened to a poor explanation of what love is, poor explanation of what the vision of life is. So by all means, go to the gym. I'm not saying don't go to the gym, but but if you're there and you're the best looking and you don't actually love anybody there, then we've probably missed the point as guys. So step one, yeah, if you're wanting to grow in the virtue of love, is, man, look around you and look for those opportunities there. Do you love others more than the value of building yourself up in whatever way that looks?
Yeah. And I think building on that, the next thing I would say is just to look for the small opportunities to do acts of love. I think here the pictures of marriage.
Yeah.
If you want to really have a loving marriage, it's not about having huge bouquets of flowers at anniversaries and having the most extravagant dinners planned on Valentine's Day. What means a whole lot more is just the everyday kindness. Waking up, doing the dishes, saying thank you when your spouse, does something. It's the small things that are better indicators of love. And one of the powerful things is the way often it's not always the case, but by doing, we change how we feel. And we
Hmm.
often get this wrong. We wait for the action until we have the feeling. When there's this old saying that the heart is drawn after the deed. And it's often the case. And so, if you're in a situation, maybe you're at work and there's difficult people around you. Honestly, you don't like these people. How do you begin to love them? Well, begin to do the small things that show concern, compassion, humility, and to see if that doesn't begin to change your attitude as well.
That's good. Yeah. And that's hard because you got to take some initiative there and go for it. And dry action, I guess, at first is what it's
Right.
gonna take to go forward and do that. What else would you say to guys that are looking for ways to grow in love?
Yeah. Remember, there's the internal, the external. So what I just said, I'm going to flip it now and come at it from the other angle. And from the other angle, as you do these little deeds of love, you need to be aware of your hardest at the same time. And
Mm,
when you are aware of a sinful passion while you're doing the deed, don't be content with that.
mm,
That's something that you should acknowledge and confess. So, for example, let's say that there's a moment and I realize someone needs my help, and so I do the kind deed, but inside I just feel that they are wasting my time. I've got better things, more important tasks at hand. Well, in that moment, what I'm really saying is that things are more important than
mm,
people, that my task list matters more than this human being that has an eternal soul. That is a proud, greedy heart that needs to be confessed. And so, whenever the internal doesn't rhyme with the external, whenever there's something jarring between these two, you got to acknowledge what's in your heart
mm,
and do battle there, even while on the outside, you don't stop doing the things that need to be done.
that's super helpful. Yeah. One of the things I've noticed in myself is just how love is harder the more specific it becomes. And here's what I mean by that. Like it's one thing to I can read through the gospels and see that God calls me to love people,
Right.
which is hard to love people. But when he says, love neighbor, okay, now we're a little more specific, or love enemy, that's even more specific. But when you take that all the way down to love Ted, your neighbor
Right.
who you can't stand, when we get that specific, you want to challenge yourself as a man to grow in love. Man, put a name to it, right? Put
Yeah.
a name to it and make it more specific there, and it can be a way to challenge yourself to say, okay, I'm going to live this out. I'm going to go for this. I'm going to be a man of love, even in the most specific and hardest situations. And I don't know. I think I'd want to tell guys that if we want to grow in love, part of what we got to do is we've got to make growing in love a part of our conversations.
Yeah.
That sounds maybe awkward, but it needs to become a regular part of our conversations if it's something that we want to grow in. And that's true of all these virtues, right? If you want to grow in any virtue, you got to start talking about it, make it a part of your conversation. So here's a challenge I would give to guys. I'd say if you're married, sit down with your wife this week and ask her this: have I grown in love in the past year? You look your wife in the eyes and ask her, man, have I grown in love in the past year? That's a hard question. That's going to create a conversation, or even a harder one. Do I love God more now than when we first met? I think that's a great conversation starter for guys to have with their wife. Is there evidence in my life, both in attitudes and actions, that I am growing in love of God more? And if your wife looks at you and say, you loved God way more when we first met than you do now, guys, you're in trouble, right? You're headed in the wrong direction, and you need somebody to warn you of that. Or maybe that's a conversation you have with your friends, but being able to openly talk to people about, hey, am I growing in love? What would it look like? I'd even, just sitting down with a group of friends and to be able to ask, okay, if we were the kind of guys who wanted to spend time trying to grow more loving, what would that look like? What does it look like for an ordinary Christian man to spend time growing in love and pursuing that? And just to have that conversation, I think being more explicit in that way is a good way for guys to start growing in this virtue. I don't know what else. Where else would you point, guys?
Yeah. And just on that, I think, there's something about making that part of the purpose of a group. Again, you think of small groups. What's the purpose of a lot of discipleship groups among men? To finish a book. Well, what's the good of that? Like, if you actually in a circle of men, and we meet because we want to grow as men that love each other and that love God, and that spills out elsewhere in our life. I mean, that's a whole different reason to meet. And that'll, I think that'll influence and affect the culture of a group. But in terms of what else, I mean, one thing I'd say to guys, especially modern men, where there's so much encouragement to maintain independence, to avoid responsibility, to date as long as you can, because you don't want to actually tie the knot. That if we want to grow in loving people, there's no better school to enroll in than those committed relationships where every day there's someone right there in front of you that you are responsible for. Now, that means marriage, that means family. And so, for all of these men that know what I really want is success in career, or what I really want is to be able to do what I want on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. Well, that's fine if what you want is to become a selfish, greedy, gluttonous person. If you want to become a person that has these virtues we're describing, commit. If God shows you, a Christian woman, commit in marriage. Children, I mean, they'll give you opportunities, endless opportunities to be self-giving. And then I tag on to that, though, commit to church. Because what we do with church is, as you become a member, here is a circle of people, like you said earlier, each of them has a name. And so all of a sudden you've got a small group. You've got people of different ages. A lot will be needy, a lot will be difficult, but you will have an opportunity to bear with people, to forgive people, to be patient with people. And so it takes away the question, who, because all of a sudden is answered by those people right in your life.
Yeah, it's funny. There is endless opportunities to challenge ourselves to grow in this virtue, right? It's just the names and the people are all around us. The opportunity is there. It's just, are we going to be the kind of men that take advantage of it and go and do it? So that definitely is a high challenge for guys. I think I'd want to leave guys somewhere where I think you famously take us a lot, and I'm thankful for you. You're really good about pointing guys towards meditating on the cross. And this is, it's infected me in a good way, Joe. The fact that you come back to thinking about the cross so much, and so I don't know. Would you say, even in your life personally, that's been something that's helped you grow in love? Is just thinking about the cross? Because I think that's where I want to point guys as we end.
Yeah, I think by visiting the cross. There's a wonderful hymn that speaks of never higher than the feet, never further than thy cross. And so it situates us right there. And it talks about what we gather as we gaze. And one of the things we gather is love to serve. And so I'll be honest, I'm selfish. I get tired. Where you start a new day and your heart feels depleted. And it's like, where am I going to get love for today? Well, the place I would point guys to is go, sit again at the cross. And it's like when the Israelites went out and each day gathered manna, and they only got a day's portion. They had to keep going back. And that's like the Christian life. You start your day, you go to the cross, and as you see and as you behold the supreme revelation of love, the one that through all of history will be just glorying in, as you're there, what you find is it's like, okay, your heart gets charged up. And suddenly you've got something that you can take into this world. And so, none of this is possible if we rely on ourselves. We need the grace of God. And you ask, where do you get the grace? Well, you get the grace from Jesus. And so go to Jesus and get the grace that you need to grow in love.
That's good. That's a great place to land, guys, because we want to train men in spiritual fitness, be more fit in your life. And good way to do that, guys, is the spiritual exercise that Joe just outlined. We have a whole book, 100 spiritual exercises here with hymn workouts, and one of which is a hymn that Joe just quoted. And what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to that workout, to the workout of meditating on that hymn. And guys, if you're looking for a way to exert some of your mind and energy and imagination, a way to really sweat it out spiritually, meditate on the words of one of these hymns. Look up the Bible references. Spend 15 minutes there meditating on the cross. See what that does to you. See what it does to your mind for the day and your attitudes, your actions, because that's going to get you, I believe, on that path of being a man that's growing in love. So y'all do that, try that out, and join us next week because we're going to continue talking about some of the virtues of godly character.